Hi, and welcome to With Chanakya. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how you can take a containerized Node.js API and then deploy that to DigitalOcean using Docker. Let's get started. In today's video, we'll be talking about how you can build and push a container image to Docker Hub. And after that, we'll create a droplet on DigitalOcean, which is a virtual machine. And then we'll use SSH keys to access that droplet and make sure that we can install Docker and then pull from Docker Hub the container that we previously built, run that container on your DigitalOcean droplet, and then actually map a public domain to that container so that you can actually access the application that you've built from anywhere. Let's get into it. The first step for us today is going to be to clone a previous tutorial that I created where we built a Node.js and Express API, and then we containerized that using Docker. I'll have the links to both of those tutorials and the sample code in the description below. By the way, if you want to see more content like this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click on the bell icon. So let's go ahead and get started with that. The first step for us is to head over to my GitHub repositories here, and I'm going to go over to repositories, and we're going to take a look at the Node.js API container repository. I'm going to go ahead and copy the link. We're going to come back over here, and I'm just going to do a quick git clone, paste that URL in there, and that'll clone the project for me. So now I have access to all the code. A couple of things here. We have a REST API, a simple REST API that exposes a couple of routes. It's a dog API, so we have a /dogs route, a /dog by name route, and then we also have some static content. So there's a HTML page with some images being shown as well. We containerize this using Docker. So it's a simple Docker file. We're using the Node.js base image, and then we're essentially installing all of the Node.js dependencies using npm, and then we're exposing port 9900 on this container image. That's the Docker file that we have. So to get things started off, let's go ahead and quickly build the Docker image that we want for this. So we're going to use the Docker build command. So we're going to say Docker build everything that's here. Actually, we'll have to get into that folder first. So there we go. So let's do Docker build everything here, and we'll tag it. I'm going to use the username that I have on Docker Hub. So clocum13 is my username on Docker Hub. I've already created an account there. So I'm going to use that in the path here. And then the next part of it is the name of the container image. And I'm going to give a version. I'm going to call it 1.0. That's the version that I want to give for this particular container image. So let's go ahead and build that. It's going to go through all the steps, creating the directory, pulling the Node.js dependencies using npm, and then copying over the source code for the Docker image. Perfect. So now that we have our Docker image built, we can actually go and say Docker images, and you can see the new one with the tag version 1.0 was created just now. That's the Docker image that we're going to use. Just to see it actually running, we can say Docker run -p for the port. I'm going to say 8080 and then map that to 9900. And then let's give it the rest of the path here. We'll say /dog API :1.0. So that's the API, or sorry, that's the Docker container that we're looking to run here. So it looks like 8080 is already being used. So let's quickly just go ahead and use a different port. It's as simple as that. Most likely I have a Docker thread running somewhere else. So there you go. Our API is up and running. I can actually navigate to the browser right now, and we'll go ahead and say localhost 8081 is what we gave. And you can see our content is coming up. So our Docker image is working and it's up and running. Now, in this tutorial, we specifically want to be able to run this on the cloud, on DigitalOcean. So what we're going to do is we're going to push this Docker image to Docker Hub. So I already have a Docker Hub account here. There's no repositories at this point in time. It's a free account on Docker Hub, and I can push my Docker images or container images to Docker Hub using the push command. Before I do that, we're going to have to go ahead and do Docker login. It's very simple. We're just going to give your username and then your password, and we should be logged in here. And once we're logged in, it's as simple as saying Docker push, and then give the name, so the username slash the name of the image, and then the tag that we have for that particular image. So we're pushing v1.0 of the Docker image that we just built a couple of minutes ago. So let's go ahead and do Docker push, and it's going to go ahead and push this image to Docker Hub. Docker Hub is a repository for container images so that you can pull them, version them, do all sorts of things over there. Perfect. So now our Docker image is pushed to Docker Hub. We can go ahead here. Let's refresh this page. And you can see we now have our Dog API container image available publicly on Docker Hub. The next step in this tutorial is to create our DigitalOcean Droplet. A droplet is a virtual machine on DigitalOcean. That's what they call it. So let's go over to DigitalOcean. I'm already logged in. I have a project already created, so it's quite easy from here. Just a quick note, you can actually go to the DigitalOcean marketplace and you can install or you can set up a droplet that already has Docker installed on it. Just for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to take a regular DigitalOcean droplet, Ubuntu droplet, and I'm going to install Docker just so that you can see that. So we're going to select Ubuntu. What I was mentioning is right over here in Marketplace, you can actually select one which already has Docker on it. I'm not going to do that for today. We're going to select Ubuntu Basic. We'll just select regular SSD, the smallest size possible. That's absolutely fine. We're not adding any volumes right now. Let's go ahead and select New York. And then one of the things here that it's going to ask for is SSH keys. You can always log in using a password, but I would recommend using SSH keys. So let's go ahead and say new SSH key here. And it's asking you to actually put the SSH key content here. So when you generate an SSH key, you're going to have a public key and a private key. So what you're going to do is keep the private key with you so that you can use that to log in using SSH to your virtual machine. And you would paste the public key and give that to DigitalOcean. To do that, we're going to use the simple command SSH keygen. I'm going to copy that. We're going to come back over here, and within the folder, I'm just going to quickly go ahead and create a new folder called keys. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to go to git ignore, and I'm going to say ignore keys. Same thing here in Docker ignore. I'm going to say ignore keys. We don't want those keys being distributed to somebody else through any of those channels. So let's go ahead and cd into the keys folder here, and we can simply run the command that we just copied, which is SSH keygen. It has a lot of other options as well. You can specify the encryption that you want to use and others. We're just going to use the plain vanilla SSH keygen for now. It's going to ask you ID_RSA is going to be the default file name. You can change this if you want. I'm going to leave it default, so I'm just going to click on enter. And then it's saying that within that specific folder, an ID_RSA already exists. So just to be careful, I'm going to say no at this point in time because that key might be being used by something else. So I'm going to again do SSH keygen, and let's call this instead of ID_RSA, let's call it the DO SSH key, just so that we don't mess this up. It's asking for a passphrase, kind of like a password on top of the SSH key. I'm going to leave it default empty for now. Perfect. So now that that's been done, you should be able to do a quick ls, and you'll see two key files here. The .pub is a public key file that you should be using for connecting it to DigitalOcean. So we're going to go ahead and say cat do.pub and print that. This is the value of the key. I'm going to go ahead and copy that. We're going to go back over to DigitalOcean and paste that in here. And we'll call this our Docker key. You can call it anything you want. I'm just going to call it that. We're going to go ahead and say add keys. And now in this case, we're going to use this key for this droplet or this virtual machine. So that's the authentication for us. We're going to leave everything else as is. And then we're going to go ahead and say create droplet. All right, so now that you can see our DigitalOcean droplet was created and it's given a public IP as well, but there's nothing running on this DigitalOcean droplet. There's a couple of ways that you can access the Ubuntu instance. One is you can use the console within DigitalOcean, which will kind of open up a neato browser-based console, which you can use, or you can use the SSH keys that we created previously, and you can SSH into this instance as well. Just for the sake of this demo, let's go ahead and use SSH instead of this mechanism. So we'll go ahead and copy the IP address, the public IP address of this instance. Let's go back over to our terminal. I'm going to clear this. We're going to say SSH hyphen, let's actually go back a step. We're going to say SSH hyphen I. Keys is a folder where we have the key. DOSSH key is the key that we have. And then we have the IP address. Let's go ahead and say yes. And you can see we're now logged in into our Ubuntu machine. Perfect. The next step for us is going to be to go ahead and actually get Docker installed on this machine, because at this point in time, if you see, we don't have Docker running here. Perfect. So to do that, we're going to quickly go ahead here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say Docker install on Ubuntu. You can go ahead over here. There's a couple of different ways, but the way that I'm going to use here is there is a convenience script that Docker provides, which we can get, and then we can run that convenience script on our machine. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that script over here. So it's the getdocker.sh. That's the file. And you can see that file is there now. And you can use the next command, which is basically just running the shell command here, or running that shell script. And we can go ahead and run that on our machine. This is going to take a couple of minutes, so I'm just going to go ahead and forward this quickly for you. All right, so we now have Docker installed on our Ubuntu machine. To test it out, we'll go ahead and say Docker version. And there you can see Docker is installed. So the next step for us is to actually run a Docker image on this Ubuntu machine so that we now have our API and our static content available publicly. To do that, we don't need to pull the image. We just need to reference that. And Docker by default, if it's not available locally on the Ubuntu machine, will say, let me go ahead and check these tags on Docker Hub and pull them over. So I'm going to say Docker run. We're going to say -p for the port. I'm going to expose 80 because that's the web port. We're going to say 9900 as the port. And then we're going to give our container name, which is clocum13 as the username. Dog API was what we used. And then 1.0. So when I run this, it's going to say unable to find it locally, pulling from clocum13 dog API using the tag 1.0. And then it's going to start pulling all the information here for us. There we go. So as you see, it has pulled the image which was not available locally. You should now actually have that image on your local machine as well. And it's run that API for us. So our API is now running on the DigitalOcean container. So we can actually go back here. Let's go back to DigitalOcean, copy the public IP that we had, go back to the browser, paste that in, and voila. Happy is now running in a container and he's available on DigitalOcean. Beautiful. So the last step that we're going to go ahead and do here is map this container or this DigitalOcean droplet to a domain. So let's go back to our project. And you can see here within the project, I can right click or click on this and say add a domain. One of the things that you have to do to validate or manage your domains within DigitalOcean is to actually redirect the name servers over to DigitalOcean so that DigitalOcean kind of has control over your DNS. You could also just go ahead, take the public IP address and map that within GoDaddy or Network Solutions or any other DNS provider. In this case, I'm going to use this. This is our instance that we have, and we're basically going to go ahead and say, let us map chanakyalocum.me. That's the domain that we want to map here. And let's go ahead and say add domain. And then what I'm going to come here and do is we have an A record here. I actually want to add another A record. So I'm going to say dogs.chanakya chanakyalocum.me, and I want that to map to this particular IP address, which is our public IP address, and then let's say create a record. So usually DNS takes a while to propagate, so I'm going to wait, and then we'll come back, and once that's propagated and the DNS is working, I'll go ahead and show that to you. Just a quick mistake here though. Let's delete this record. Looks like we don't need to give it the full name. We'll just say dogs. There you go. That's the full name that we need. And then we'll create this record. Beautiful. So now when we come back, we should have our API and our static content running at dogs.chanakyalocum.me. All right, so I think our DNS records have propagated. So let's go ahead and test it out. So instead of an IP address here, let's go ahead and say dogs.chanakyalocum.me. That's the domain that we mapped. And we can go ahead and click enter. You can see we're getting the content. Just to showcase that this is actually working, let's go ahead and say dogs here as the path, which is our API. You can see we're getting the data. We can also say /dog/happy, which is another route, and we should get the details about happy. Beautiful. We now have a Docker container that we were able to pull and run on a DigitalOcean droplet and then expose publicly using a DNS record. Thank you for watching this tutorial. If you'd like more content like this, click the like button on the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon to get notifications about new videos that I release. Thanks for watching.